Hello, my name is T.S. Akers, and I am the Curator of Collections for the McAlester Valley of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. Today I will be speaking to you about Mount Moriah, McAlester's Lost Masonic Temple. This is a presentation, or a paper I should say, that originally appeared in the fall 2020 issue of the Chronicles of Oklahoma. Visitors to southeastern Oklahoma are often surprised by the majestic beauty they discover in the forested hills that encompass the area. The region is comprised of the ancient Ouachita Mountains and its subranges, the Kiamichi and the Sambois Mountains. The terrain can be described as both beautiful and unforgiving. The dense forests and rocky outcrops came to be favored hideouts of outlaws such as the Youngers, the Dalton Gang, and Belle Starr. The clear streams and ample foliage would also prove highly conducive to the moonshiners of the region, and those native to the area can certainly attest to the fact that more than a few stills remain hidden. Today, the hills of southeastern Oklahoma also conceal a Masonic wonder of a bygone era. Here we see an artist's interpretation of Mount Moriah by Oklahoma City artist Jack Fowler. Just north of the city of McAlester lies a road with what can only be described as a name entirely uncommon to the area. Unless seeking it out, one could easily pass by Mount Moriah Road without ever knowing it. This ordinary road has not always bore such a unique name. It would in time lead to one of the state's most unique Masonic temples. Of course, the citizens of McAlester were no strangers to Masonic halls. The Sir Knights of McAlester Commandery No. 3 took part in the cornerstone ceremony of their own meeting hall on Grand Avenue in 1906. That same year also saw the laying of the cornerstone of the Second Scottish Rite Temple in McAlester. In 1908, the idea for an open-air conferral of the Master Mason degree originated within McAlester Lodge No. 9, which was conducted in June. The companions of Union Council No. 3, Royal and Select Masters, saw an opportunity with that open-air conferral and erected an ancient lodge room with an altar and the three principal stations built from rock. The site they selected, a hill located roughly 1.5 miles west of North McAlester, was dubbed Mount Moriah. And here we see that original outdoor conferral of the Master Mason degree, and this is by a team of past masters on June 12th, 1908. And the location at that time was apparently called Bald Knob, but was thus christened Mount Moriah. On August 10th, 1908, Union Council No. 3 was opened under special dispensation at Mount Moriah for their own open-air conferral of the degrees of Royal, Select, and Super Excellent Master on a class of 22 candidates. Present that day were nearly all the Grand Council officers. As the day came to an end, a cement vault was buried in the northeast corner of the site to be opened in 1934. The deposit, which was marked by a triangular tablet, contained the name of all present that day, along with a copy of the proceedings of the Grand Council of Royal and Select Masters of Oklahoma from that year, and other writings on the history of Masonry in the state. The intention of the companions of Union Council No. 3 was to make the degree conferral an annual pilgrimage. The 7 acres on which Mount Moriah was located belonged to companion Thomas Archibald, and plans were being made to excavate a tunnel from the south side of the hill, which would include arches terminating in a vault for the purpose of conferring the cryptic degrees. And here we see those companions of Union Council No. 3 assembled for that first open-air conferral, and this was on August 10th. 1908. This is a recently discovered photograph. We're still finding photographs that pertain to the history of Mount Moriah. In May of 1909, the area where Mount Moriah was located saw construction begin on the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. While hills were precisely what was needed for the grand plans that encompass Mount Moriah, they proved to be a challenge for construction of the prison. It would require more than 6,300 cubic yards of concrete and the removal of more than 2 million cubic yards of rock and soil for the prison's walls alone. At first, the prison did not interfere with the annual pilgrimage, and Union Council No. 3 was working to purchase the land where Mount Moriah was located. This changed in 1911 and the hill that was Mount Moriah was officially condemned for prison use. The committee that had been working to secure the land on which the original Mount Moriah was located immediately identified another suitable location. 10 acres, located about 1¾ miles north of the terminus of the North McAlester streetcar line. The six-man committee responsible for the project was headed by William H. Essex and consisted of Christopher Springer, Jabez H. Mann, Edmund H. Doyle, Edward T. Richards, and Wesley E. Voorhees. All were prominent Masons in McAlester, with Essex, Springer, Mann, and Doyle having served as illustrious Grand Master. Richards, who traveled frequently, had made a visit to the Holy Land and returned home with sketches and notes on King Solomon's temple. With these in hand, the committee decided their temple should be a scaled-down replica of Solomon's. At the summit of the hill was to be erected a building to serve as the Royal Arch Tabernacle. The committee called for the tunnels and arches outlined for the original site to be included, and directed that the cement vault originally deposited be moved to its new home. By 1914, the annual pilgrimage to Mount Moriah was continuing at the new site, where construction was underway. Attendees could purchase stones inscribed with their name, residence, and pilgrimage date to help underwrite construction. Like any good Masonic function, a luncheon prepared by the Order of the Eastern Star accompanied the conferral of the cryptic degrees. The pilgrimage became a must-attend event, with often as many as 20 separate councils of royal and select masters represented. And here we see the companions and the Eastern Star ladies assembled for the luncheon um, at the new site of Mount Moriah in 1912. In 1915, Christopher Springer reported to the Grand Council that the crypt at Mount Moriah was complete. A dining hall was added to the site in 1918 with electric lighting provided by Edward T. Richards. Of the temple complex, Charles Krieger penned the following. Mount Moriah is a lodge room built upon or in a hill a few miles north of McAlester. It is a beautiful site, commanding an uninterrupted view across the valley. 7 separate towns may be seen plainly on a clear day. A romantic landscape spreads itself a distance of 20 miles southward. No human artist could successfully imitate such a scene. Rich fertile valleys, beautiful lakes, noble mountains, and everywhere the sign of enterprise, progress, wealth, happiness. Krieger described the temple in 1919 as consisting of 2 buildings, 30 by 90 feet, built into solid rock. Each structure was 2 stories, but the lower story of the lodge, building, or temple proper was subterranean, the crypt, with the floor of the upper story being supported by 9 stone arches. The dining hall was connected to the temple by way of a tunnel commencing from the 9th arch of the underground crypt, with a series of 3, 5, and 7 steps leading down to the passageway. Within the lodge room of the upper story of the temple sat an altar of solid rock. Now these are photographs that were taken during construction of the temple. And this is the crypt, the subterranean crypt that run underneath the lodge room of the temple proper. And this is the porch of the temple proper. Side view of the temple proper, you can see the lower portion being native stone and the upper portion being those specialty imported stones. And then there's a subterranean entrance over there to the crypt below. This is the only known photograph of the interior of the lodge room, and this is another recently discovered photograph. Here we're seeing the dining hall, 2 stories also of native stone. And this is the only known photograph of the interior of the dining room, or dining hall, I should say. And this is a view into the tunnel that connected the dining hall to the temple proper. And I believe this is if you were standing in the dining hall looking in as the temple would lead to the temple proper, as the tunnel would lead to the temple proper, I should say. Well, the day-to-day Masonic activity of Union Council Number 3 was conducted at North McAlester Masonic Temple. The annual pilgrimage to Mount Moriah carried on. Though original plans called for a portion of the Mount Moriah Temple complex to be used as a Royal Arch Tabernacle, the site was exclusively used for the conferral of the cryptic degrees. The erection of a temple for such annual ceremonies was a bold move in itself, but Union Council Number 3 had even more grand ideas. In 1921, plans were developed to build a park for Masonic families at Mount Moriah at an estimated cost of $15,000 to $20,000. Included in the plans were a swimming pool, skating rink, tennis court, croquet grounds, and I particularly enjoy playing croquet, and a dance pavilion. To raise the funds necessary for construction, memberships to the park were to be offered to Master Masons for $10 with proposed annual dues of $1. The companions of Union Council Number 3 also looked to another source for funding, the Grand Council of Royal and Select Masters of Oklahoma. The 1919 Assembly of the Grand Council had been held at Mount Moriah under the direction of illustrious Grand Master William J. Schaefer, a McAlester man. It was without question that there existed support for Mount Moriah in the Grand Council. Charles E. Krieger noted in his annual address as illustrious Grand Master in 1921 that Mount Moriah was too important to remain a purely local institution, and urged that funds be appropriated for the completion and maintenance of the temple complex. A committee was established by the Grand Council of Oklahoma to consider the matter and reported back in 1923 that funds could simply not be spared for Mount Moriah. Ultimately, the plan for the park would never be realized. And this is a souvenir ribbon from the annual assembly of the Grand Council when they met at Mount Moriah in 1919. And you see there it says, "Greetings from Mount Moriah," with entrance to the subterranean tunnel leading to the Ninth Arch. And you see that photograph there of the tunnel on the ribbon. While the Masons of McAlester would check in on Mount Moriah regularly outside of the annual pilgrimage, they were not the only people visiting the site. The temple became somewhat of a local attraction. Boy Scouts on a tenderfoot hike made a visit to Mount Moriah in 1919. Unbeknownst to the Masons, the Scouts were able to open the temple door and cautiously made their way into the tunnel. While the Scouts were led by the curiosity of youth, others came to Mount Moriah with more malicious intent. William H. Essex noted that vandals regularly broke windows of the temple complex, had broken the laudrum altar to the point that it had to be removed, and pried locks off doors. Essex attributed some of the vandalism to an individual from Krebs who owned property adjacent to Mount Moriah. An error in the abstract showed this property to overlap the temple, and the gentleman was known to remark that the Masons were building him a nice home up there that he intended to take possession of one day. The matter of the abstract was eventually settled, but the ongoing vandalism highlighted how a lack of a caretaker living on site was a detriment to Mount Moriah. A notice appeared in the McAlester News Capital in 1921 that read in part, "This is private property, and hereafter no visiting or trespassing will be allowed by the public." The hope was to curb the ongoing damage, but Masons wishing to visit the temple outside of a pilgrimage could obtain a pass from Christopher Springer in North McAlester. And this is that notice that appeared in the McAlester News Capital in February of 1921. On September 20th, 1923, the 16th annual pilgrimage to Mount Moriah was made by the companions of Union Council Number 3. There were several Masonic dignitaries present that day. Among them were Fay Hempstead, General Grand Master of the General Grand Council of the United States, and his deputy, Bert S. Lee. Also present was George W. Walker, illustrious Grand Master of Missouri, and Mark P. Olney, past Grand High Priest of Arkansas. William P. Freeman, Grand Master of Masons of Oklahoma, was there, and so was Frank Craig, Sovereign Grand Inspector General of the Scottish Rite in Oklahoma. The honor of conferring the Royal and Select Master degrees that day was given to Ardmore Council Number 11, with Charles E. Krieger communicating the super excellent Master degree himself. Lunch that day was not served at Mount Moriah, but at the North McAlester Temple. Perhaps this was due to the condition of the temple complex, which was in decline. It was reported earlier in the year that the buildings needed improvement and repair that would require considerable expense. What is unclear from the official report of that day is if those companions knew that would be the last annual pilgrimage to Mount Moriah. In 1908, when Mount Moriah was first established by Union Council Number 3, they buried a vault to be opened in 1934. It was ultimately exhumed and reburied at the new site. Numerous men received the degrees of Royal and Select Master at Mount Moriah during the annual pilgrimages. one of whom was Edward M. Washington in 1918. 10 years later, when Washington was appointed Grand Sentinel of the Grand Council of Oklahoma, he vowed to return to Mount Moriah if he ever became illustrious Grand Master to open the secret vault. On October 10, 1935, Washington returned to Mount Moriah to fulfill his promise. Nearly 150 Masons assembled that day, which included a conferral of the Super Excellent Master degree by Ada Council Number 10 on a class of 24 candidates. And here we see those men assembled in 1935 for what was probably the very final visit to Mount Moriah. And this is a photograph that we've had for a while, but not an original photograph. And we recently were able to locate an original photograph and get higher resolution scans, which yielded some interesting aspects to the photograph. So, for example, of particular interest here is you'll notice that these two gentlemen and a handful of others across the photograph are wearing triangular Masonic aprons. And these aprons are in line with what Albert G. Mackey described in his a manual of the council, stating that an apron of the select master must be black, lined and edged with red. The apron should be of a triangular form. Now, these aprons, though the photograph is black and white, we can tell what color they are. They are indeed black, and they are lined with red. The fellow there in the light double-breasted suit with a Homburg hat on, that is illustrious Grand Master Edward M. Washington. The frail fellow next to him is James A. Latham, who was Grand Recorder of the Grand Council for I believe 28 years. And then you see some other men across the crowd also wearing the triangular aprons. And then also, if you zoom in on the photograph, you can see those stones inscribed with the names of the companions and their pilgrimage dates and residences that were used to finance the building. As the 1920s progressed, the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry became very popular in Oklahoma, with its large temples in Guthrie and McAlester. With as many as 1,700 men joining the McAlester Valley of the Scottish Rite in 1 year, the Albert Pike Dormitory was constructed in the early part of the decade to house them all during the weekend degree conferrals known as reunions. The dormitory would become the Albert Pike Hospital in 1928. That same year, it was decided to undertake the rebuilding of the temple, a massive expansion of the McAlester Scottish Rite Temple that would cost $575,000. The expansion was completed in 1930 with accommodations for all of the Masonic orders of McAlester, including Union Council Number 3. As the Scottish Rite Temple became the center of Masonic activity in McAlester, and the Great Depression caused a drop in membership due to men not being able to afford the dues, Masonic interest in Mount Moriah waned. The site did, however, remain popular with a curious public. Mount Moriah soon fell into disrepair and became dangerous to adventure seekers, forcing the companions of Union Council Number 3 to make the decision to pull down the walls of the temple proper, thus filling in the crypt. The task of disposing of the property fell upon Edward T. Richards, the surviving member of the committee responsible for building Mount Moriah. The land was sold to the highest bidder, and what was once the dining hall became a hay barn. A reporter visiting Mount Moriah in 1957 found the road leading up to the temple complex to be a washed-out, rock-filled gully. After a brief hike, they reached the temple ruins. Of the temple proper, there remained a portion of the porch and the stairs leading up to it, which you can see here. The tunnel, which led to the dining hall, remained intact. The dining hall itself still had its east and north walls, though the southern half of the roof and walls had caved in. McAlester Masons visiting the site in 2016 found even less, but the tunnel remained relatively intact, and it is said that it became common for Masons visiting Mount Moriah, as it lay in ruins, to remove the stones with engraved names that were used to finance the project. These stones have been known to surface across McAlester from time to time. Mount Moriah is but a fading memory today, mostly known only to Masons residing in McAlester. Its story remains as a monument to the industry of those early Masons who laid the foundations of the Masonic fraternity in Oklahoma. Now, looking at the site here in 1957, we can see that it's still it's on a hill, and you can see trees in the distance, but it's not grown up around it. This is a photograph from 2016 And this photograph is actually of the crypt that ran underneath the temple proper. And it looks spacious, but I can assure you it is not. And this is from a visit I was able to make to the site, and you can see that this is also the crypt running underneath the temple proper. It's not a large crypt by any stretch of the imagination. So when the degrees of the royal and select master are being conferred in the temple, individuals, as far as the performances go, there was only space in the crypt for the principal actors and one candidate. And you can also see now that the site is much more overgrown with trees and brush today. Here we are. This is looking at the steps, towards the steps of the temple proper. This is on the back end of the temple proper. These are the steps leading down into the vault as well as the tunnel that connected the dining hall to the temple proper. This is looking towards the dining hall, and there in the foreground you can see the tunnel, and the tunnel is actually quite spacious. And then here's a view looking back towards what walls are left of the dining hall. And that concludes my presentation on Mount Moriah. I hope you found it particularly interesting, and I hope to be back with more.